right. So we'll be starting the fireside chat. It's my pleasure to be here with you this afternoon. My name is Chibueze Ewuzie. I represent Solina Center for International Development and Research, and I'll be your facilitator for today's session. But before we get into things, I wanted to ask everyone a question. So just, if this question resonates with you, just raise your hand. Has anybody ever asked you, when are you going to get married? Has anybody ever asked? Just wave, just wave. An auntie, uncle. Personally, I know I've told somebody in this room that thing, so I'm guilty. Okay, what about, boys are not meant to be in the kitchen. Have we heard that before? Awesome. Okay, what about don't cry? You're a man. Be strong. I've heard this one a lot recently. So I think these are kind of like a few examples, right, of how norms really shape and influence lifelong decisions that we make. So now let's imagine. Imagine as a mother, you can't take your child to the hospital without the permission of your husband. What do you think that would do to the child? Or perhaps you're someone with HIV, and then family members are saying, avoid these persons. I think that today's discussion is really about how deeply rooted social and gender norms influence who gets access to healthcare, the quality of care that they receive, and how equitable health programs deliver the promises that we make. So we'll try to unpack the barriers that these norms create, while spotlighting gender mainstreaming as a proven equity approach that bridges the service gap, but also fosters inclusion and sustainability. Before I get into things, I'd just like to highlight just a few things that we at Solina Center for International Research and Development, how important this topic is to us. At CEDA, we recognize that gender parity remains one of the biggest barriers to equitable health and development outcomes. That is why we launched the Sustaining Action for Gender Equality, SAGE program, which is an initiative that helps us to embed gender expertise, tools, and strategies across both our internal systems as well as our interventions, with a special focus on improving outcomes for women and girls. And then there's also SNLC, whose mission is to strengthen research and practice on social norms. And we do this by a network of practitioners, researchers, evaluators, and advocates who share knowledge, generate evidence, as well as develop resources to support ethnic-informed social and behavioral change programming. So in our own little way, in the work that we do, in how we do business, both internally and from a programmatic lens, shaping gender norms is something that we are very passionate about. And hopefully through today's conversation, we can do a deep dive in how we can improve outcomes for health programs. So we have a poll that we're going to project on the screen now. Now, the purpose of this poll is to kind of gather our expectations for today's session so that we can infuse your thoughts, your concerns into the conversation. So I'll just call on the tech team now to project the poll on the screen. And please, once they do, kindly take out your phones, scan the barcode, and then tell us what you're thinking. Tech team, can we have the poll, please? So once you see the barcode, please pick out your phone, scan the barcode. and let us know what you think. What are your expectations for today's session? What do you want to discuss? What do you want to hear about? We're trying to make sure that, as much as possible, we carry the audience along in today's conversation. So please scan the barcode and let's hear from you. Tech team, is there a way we can also project the outcomes so that we can also do that at the same time? We can see how people are voting. Is that possible? Or we should wait to the end? Should we wait to the end? Okay, that's fine. Tech team, please let me know when you have a sizable amount of responses so that we can proceed. We're already behind schedule, so I don't want to keep us any longer. How are we doing on the poll? Have you guys started? Network. So sorry about that. I suspected that would be an issue. But let's see. Let's keep trying. Let's keep trying. So for those of us that are just joining the room, we're trying to ensure that the conversation today is grounded in the expectations of the audience. So please speak out your phones, scan the barcode, and tell us what you would like to hear from today's speakers. Okay, seems there's some technical issue with the poll. Please, by show of hand, if you've been able to respond to the poll, can we see your hand? If you've been able to respond to the poll, can we see your hands up? So that means it's not working then. Or the network. But has it opened? If you can see it, it's open. You can see the question, but you just can't respond. Okay, that's fine. Has anybody been able to finish? Any lucky person? Yeah, I know. I know it's opening, but has anybody responded? Nobody. Sorry. Anyone? Okay, I think we might have to proceed so that we don't hold up the conversation any longer. So it's my great privilege to introduce to you the moderator for today's panel session, my colleague, who will kind of provide the backdrop from the lens of how CEDA is approaching this topic through the work that we do and also how we work as an organization. So please make welcome Dr. Rehana Ibrahim, Principal at CEDA. Dr. Rehana is a development professional with over a decade of experience strengthening health and social systems across Africa. Please put your hands together for her. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chibueze. My name is Rehana. People call me Rai because it's easier. You can skip the Rihanna jokes. And I do women things and women leadership and trying to make the world more equal. And today I just wanted to talk to you about some of what we have learned on not just making gender a buzzword, but actually being about it in every way, both from an organization's lens, as well as from programs and how we execute and the outcomes that we're trying to achieve. Like Chibueze said, I'm sure we've all experienced norms in one way or the other. And when we say norms is what are those unspoken rules or unwritten rules that essentially guide how a collective or a group of people interact or behave. And oftentimes it's accompanied by a sanction. So it's different from behavior, which is more personal. It's like what I do versus what I do by virtue of what my community expects from me. So we were talking about when will you get married, right? So if you do not get married by a certain age as a woman or even as a man, there's certain sanctions that might come in some communities to you for being unmarried, right? Or a woman goes out without permission in certain localities. That's a norm with a consequence, and the consequence is often something that is meted or something that is withdrawn from the person. Oftentimes, those norms exist within cultures, often shaped by religion, shaped by the times as well, and we are seeing a lot of changes in those as well. But at the core of it, regardless of where you go, we see that gender sits in the middle of it, and those things can impact whether your health program is working or not, whether girls are educated or not, whether your empowerment project is going to succeed or not. And basically everything we do as a people, as a human collective, are we able to move forward if we remove these barriers or not? And just moving to the first around who we are at CEDA and why this is important, I will take us back to norms in a bit. But can we move it to the slide that has who we are as CEDA, just so we can land on these things? I mean, just bringing it back to norms. There is all of the work that we do. I don't know, how many people in this room do health-related work? Health sector. I think half the room. How many people do like gender GBV related work? Fantastic. Education, great. Economic empowerment. So the pillars of development, or what we consider human capital development, that people are well, that they have money and they're educated to be able to achieve their maximal impact. And those are indicators of how well a society, a community, a country, or the world is doing, right? But because of these norms, we see them showing up in our work, right? We see that girls are not enrolled in school, or women are not able to deliver in health facilities or get the care that they need and all of that. And the core of the work that we do in CEDA is targeted at improving health and social outcomes for vulnerable populations. Naturally, by virtue of where we are, women are invulnerable, are a big chunk of the vulnerable population. We know that globally as well. And of course, children. But at the same time, our work often focuses on health, right? Trying to say, okay, how do we get the health workers trained and deployed? How can we make sure the facilities are functional? How can we make sure that communities are bought in? But oftentimes, programs do not think about those norms, understand them, and also use them to inform how they are designed, but focusing again on removing those barriers, not just dancing around them or being cognizant of them, right? So we've executed projects, over 60 of them, over the last 10 years. We've realized that gender had to be a big piece of the work that we do. Otherwise, we were not going to get to the performances or to the achievements we wanted as fast as we could, right? This is just background. Now, on the next slide, the gender work that we do, or the way that we think about gender, and it'd be useful to understand how you think about gender in your work as well, across 3 pillars. And this is from learning those lessons and seeing that gender is important to embed across programs. But we also realize that you cannot say you are doing gender in your program if, as an institution, you're not about it. So as an institution, do you really care about gender? And part of our efforts revolve around strategic planning. So we have a 5-year organizational plan, and there are pillars specifically in there that are focused on advancing gender. This is as an institution. So we want equal female representation, or more female at the board level. We want more women in leadership, right? So more female managers, more female directors. We want equitable policies and benefits, right? So we want maternal leave that is actually useful for the woman. We want a structure that allows her, when she goes on maternity leave and comes back, she can reintegrate. Even if her project is no longer fit for her, we're able to work with her to figure out what she needs to be working on when she comes back. We're talking about childcare support. We have a creche in the office that supports that. So are you, as an organization, structured to support the advancement of women's careers and remove the and not constitute a barrier yourself as an organization? And for all of us doing development work, you will understand that beyond just writing it on paper is what are the policies that you have that make the environment inclusive for staff. And then there's, of course, workforce, right? Do you have parity in your workforce? What are your hiring? How are we hiring? And is it fair? Is it equitable? Are we thinking about in how we're staffing our teams such that it's not an all-women team, it's not an all-men team, right? And of course, in programs, how have we designed our program implementation framework that ensures that gender is embedded across board, and are those enshrined? So if I have a new project today, how am I making sure that that project is responsive from right from even when I'm writing the proposals? So these are systems that we're putting in place with some progress that I'll show you. On the second side is transformative programs, right? So there are programs you can design that will say, okay, I'm trying to get kids vaccinated, and the mother cannot come because there are some sociocultural norms that prevent her from coming. Many of them are gender related, so she needs permission. There are issues with distance. There are issues with the mother-in-law not really buying in. There's issues with how many hours she spends at the facility and the domestic work that she cannot do while she's away, and all of those things. But are you designing a program that just said, come, and we're doing awareness? Or are you actually going to understand why she's not coming? What are the gender barriers? How do you do a program that is not just focused on immunization, but is trying to empower her and give her a voice? And how do you also think about the financial? How do you empower her financially? How do you empower her to be able to negotiate with her mother-in-law or her husband to be able to get the service that she needs? Versus, are we just asking the men to give us consent, which is intentional but doesn't necessarily transform the lives of the women or shift the norm in that community? So we've been innovating programs that do that and address the problem holistically. And then, of course, advocating for women's voices and agency throughout. And then there's a big piece which is on learning and convening, some of which is what we're doing here today, which is discussing what we've learned and sharing, because we realize that gender is, I wouldn't say new, but there are a lot of concepts around it that aren't as familiar or as old as all the other tools that we have as people doing work in development. And so being able to document what we've learned, do new research on norms. Interestingly, there's research that I came across, and we've also been doing, which says that apparently the economic situation in Nigeria is shifting our norms positively. So we're now seeing more family planning uptake because of the economic downturn in Nigeria, which, okay, we can say is a good win. Like, norms are shifting. People are now saying it's okay to do this, but how is that ultimately worsening or going to lead to some future norms in the future as we continue to implement? But yes, studying research, trying to understand what's changing. Is it the same norms that we had before that we have now? And how are we able to share as people to learn what works? I'm going to run quickly through some of the results because I think the focus here should be more on the learnings. So if we can move to the next page, we talk about some of the achievements that we have from our institution to mainstream gender and make sure that we show that we care and we demonstrate it in our policies. Can we move to the next slide, please? So with SAGE, or our institutional effort for gender transformation, is called Sustaining Action for Gender Equality. My slide has not moved, please. Sustaining Action for Gender Equality. And here, like I said, a number of different things that we're doing. So we've been able to now achieve a board parity, or parity in board membership, where we now have an equal number of men and women on the board. We came from a place where we only had about 3%, about 1 out of 7 people on the board being a woman, to now having 3 out of 6, and we're pushing to still have 4 out of 7 ultimately, so we have more women for representation. Can we move to the page for SAGE, please? And then there's also progress in terms of the women in managers' cadres by supporting women to actually want to advance. So we realize that women's careers moves along normally, but then when they get to mid-level, there's typically a plateauing or a drop-off completely. So most times, because it's a young organization, you find that women are younger, they're in their early 20s, they join, they're going by mid to late 20s, or by the time they're going into mid-career, they start to drop off because they're taking on new responsibilities in the world. Social norms externally are now meaning that they cannot spend as many hours at work. They have obligations. They have to be a mother. They have to be a wife. And oftentimes, some of it is external, those pressures, but a lot of times intrinsic as well. It's like, do I feel like I can do this and do that at the same time? And is there support for me at home, but also at work to do that? So part of the support systems we put in place is, okay, let's put a creche in here. Let's allow women do longer than the 3 months maternity leave negotiated. Of course, they can take like some additional time that is unpaid for them to spend more time with their kid. When they have to travel for work, there's child support for their children. These are things that are possible, right? But oftentimes are not deliberately put in place as policies. Of course, we also had to do a lot of audit and surveys, say how are we even doing as an organization, and what are the gaps, and how do we plug that? So now we've reviewed all our policies and embedding gender in there. So whether it's procurement we're doing, or recruitment, or program execution, there's a clear way that gender shows up and is considered in the design. There's also, of course, a women's mentorship program that I said around increasing women leadership. We want women to aspire to more, but we want them to have the tools to be managers, be leaders. And so a women's mentorship program as well that we're rolling out that will help women be able to advance their careers faster and get the support that they need. And of course, across programs is now realizing that we need people whose job when they wake up is, hi, is this your program gender intentional? Have you thought about the gender considerations? You want to do capacity building for people, maybe health workers, and you put them in a room and they're women. It's not just are you training women and men, but is a woman there who has a child? Is there a space for her to keep her child while the training is happening? Is there let's for men versus women. Like those of us who do field work understand that these are the realities that make it difficult. If you go to an LGA and there's no woman in the LGA team, because there's nothing even conducive in that place that thinks about the peculiarities of gender and how we can work. Again, this is not, oh, my husband didn't allow me. These are the people implementing the program. My team are the people doing the work. They need to feel like it's possible. They need to be supported to succeed for them to then carry on to do the work that is necessary, right? Part of it is also a gender playbook or toolkit of sorts that allows our managers figure out where they can put gender in. Because again, not every project can have a gender advisor. To the extent possible, you put someone there, but who can be that focal person that is supporting that particular piece. And then the next one is on Crown, which is more an intentional project. Can we move to the next one? Now, this is taking it to the community and looking at how can we develop a platform or a network of women that we bring up and empower and train to empower others. So a peer model of volunteers within communities that are driving that voice and empowerment for women across board. And from this, we've also learned a lot about just giving women a voice and making them more active in community development. And one of the biggest testimonies for me is, yes, we've reached 50,000 kids through this intervention and 20,000 kids and 50,000 pregnant women that we continue to refer and link to services. And that's fantastic. But what is even more fantastic is that these women are saying, oh, wow, for the first time, a traditional leader called me and was asking me what is my opinion, me. Like, I've been doing volunteer work for years, but nobody has ever actually asked me to contribute, to have a voice here, right? And that's shifting how the communities are thinking about women and the place that they have and whether they can consent or not. So this is an immunization and maternal health project, but one that builds in agency and women's voices into how we're driving demand in the community. So that way we're able to advance not just the health outcomes, but also the gender as well. And then the next one is our Learning Collaborative Project, which is basically a community of practice of people doing gender work, social norms work, behavior change work across all sectors. And we try to share learnings, do conferences, have meetings, and just share a lot of resources because the gender work can be very lonely. I tell you that because oftentimes just like these people have come, they're making noise again. What exactly does it mean? How is this going to change my outcome? And I would say one of our donors, the biggest thing that they're solving is, oh yeah, how do we explain to our principal or our founder that he should invest in gender because if he does, it will help improve maternal health coverage or immunization coverage. A lot of people cannot connect the dots. And so it's important that you as an advocate are able to help them connect the dots. And that learning, that convening, that sharing what everybody is learning, especially for something that there isn't a lot of evidence for our context, for Nigeria specifically, it's important that we're learning and sharing and documenting as much as possible. Now, so what have we learned? We've learned that it is possible, right? You can transform organizations, you can transform programs, you can be deliberate, but it's going to take, can we move to the next page, please? Thank you. But because gender shows up in everything we do, you must do it, right? It's going to help you move things forward. But if you're going to do it, you can't just do it. For you to accrue the full benefits, you need to do it at an institutional level. So as an organization responsive, are the people within the organization sensitized, aware, gender-wide training? And what I took, it was like, oh, fantastic training, beautiful, it was great, people interacted, but my big thing was in the early interactions, the perspectives that I heard in the room got me concerned because I thought we were all progressive. I thought we all knew that gender shows up in our work. We're all doing this work together, so how are you telling me that you want to bomb boy first because a girl is going to be useless? Like, this is someone I'm talking about people who are super intelligent. These are the people who should be moving us towards progress, right? And we still have these ingrained norms that we have to unlearn. So I think being able to think about it, not just from, am I just changing my program, but the people implementing the program, do they believe, are they convinced? And the institution, does it have an environment to allow them do that? Of course, the leadership has to buy in, and there needs to be empathy. How do you convince leadership to agree to do something like that? I think for us, it was very easy because we had leadership that were the ones actually driving the agenda and interested. And I think we'll hear more as we have the panel to discuss, what do we hear from leaders when it comes to gender? And then, of course, we need community and we need more knowledge sharing. Like I said, it's very lonely and very hard. Gender focal persons like Khadija would know that oftentimes you're the one like pushing and advocating, and it's not always the loudest room, or you have to be the loudest in the room to be able to push the agenda and convince. And then, of course, I think one other thing is, as we're learning and we're sharing, there's a lot of global evidence that's coming out, but does it work for us here? And what is the agenda? So, for instance, we were talking about intersectionality the other time at a global community of practice. I know we're talking about sexuality, we're talking about race and things like that. And we're thinking, how does intersectionality actually happen for us? Or how does it show up for us in Nigeria? Within the ambit of Nigerian law, is sexuality something we should be talking about? Or should we focus more on disability and poverty and cultural divide and religion as the other things that can constitute barriers beyond gender? So I think just being able to contextualize the information for our local context and needs is also a critical piece of what we have learned in doing gender work. And I imagine this is not exhaustive, so I'll just pause here, ending the first part of the conversation, and take a seat for Chibueze to introduce our panel. Thank you.
Please continue to put your hands together for her. Thank you so much, Roy. Something that you said that really caught my attention was, you can't say that you're doing gender in your program and you don't care about it in your organization. You have to walk the talk. And I think that that's something that we're really proud at CEDA to be doing. And just like she's highlighted, all the different initiatives and the outcomes from those initiatives that we've been able to ensure that as much as we're trying to infuse gender mainstream programs, we're also, imbibing it in our culture as an organization. So thank you so much, Rai, for that. So I just want to remind everyone, once again, we're going to put up the barcode so that you can scan. I think it's working now. So tech team, can we have the barcode one more time? So that we can get your feedback and opinions about the things that you would like to hear in the conversation so that we can ensure that they're highlighted. All right, everyone, please bring out your phones. I'm not seeing so many phones up. Please bring out your phones. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And let me know if the link is working this time. We don't want to spend too much time on this. Is it working? Is the link working? If you've been successful, at least in opening the link, can you just wave so we see you? Okay, good. Okay, now try and fill the form. Still the same thing? Okay, I think that's all right. So before I invite the other speakers to the stage, I would like to introduce them. So we have two guest speakers joining us on stage today. The very first one is Dorothy Njemanze. She's the founder and ED of Dorothy Njemanze Foundation. Thank you. Dorothy is a media and development strategist, gender and democracy advocate, and a right defender with over 20 years' experience in safeguarding, policy influence, and nonprofit leadership. She is the executive director of the Dorothy Njemanze Foundation, a leading voice against sexual and gender-based violence in Nigeria. Through media, advocacy, and policy reforms, including VAPP Act and Gender and Equal Opportunity Bill, Dorothy has advanced women's rights across West Africa. She played a pivotal role in the 2017 ECOWAS court ruling under the Maputo Protocol and has received global recognition such as Amnesty International's Ginetta Sagen Award and the EU Ambassador Against SGBV honor. She continues to champion women's participation, governance reforms, and human rights locally and internationally. She also happens to be an IMO star and a fellow IMSO alumni like myself. So please put your hands together for her. Thank you. Next, we have Tola Sumonu Balogun, who is an associate partner, McKinsey and Company. Please put your hands together for her. She specializes in primary health care and RMNCH, designing and implementing innovative service delivery models and community health programs that expand access to maternal and child health, malaria, TB, and HIV services. Tola has also supported reforms to strengthen Nigeria's primary health system, from improving 8,000 PHCs to redesigning funding models and developing a workforce strategy to create 500,000 healthcare jobs. She holds an MBA from Wharton and a BSc in economics from Stanford University. Please put your hands together for Tola. Just before I yield the mic to Rai, I just want to announce that there's another poll that will be going around the room. Now, this poll is more specific to this session. So please take a moment to provide feedback on the session using the QR code that will be shared by the attendants in the room. All right, over to you, Rai.
Thank you very much, Chibueze. And welcome, Dorothy. Welcome, Tola. Thanks for coming. Happy to see faces in the room. I think the conversation that we've been having has been around norms and gender, right? How gender affects, or how norms related to gender, are you male, are you female, how do you show up in the world, can affect access to services or expose us to certain harms or risks that ultimately affect development. And we also know that gender sits or affects certain SDGs like health, and of course gender equality, which is SDG 5 itself. But we know that the gap is wide and it's big. And in Nigeria, we see it in health, we see it in GBV, we see it in economy, we see it everywhere. And I think everybody in the room can relate as well. So my first question is to Tola, actually, because we're coming from a place of who is in the workforce. What is the workplace like? What economic opportunities exist for women? And how do we navigate the challenges or institutional biases or issues that may show up, right? I think my first question is, you anchor a lot of the maternal health portfolio for McKinsey, and the core of your work is around supporting governments to design large interventions for impact. At the same time, you also work on the McKinsey Women in the Workplace annual report, which is one of my favorite reports, and I'm also excited that we got to participate in the survey for last year. Big question for me is, how do you think that women in the workforce or women in leadership affect institutions? Or, like, why is it important for institutions, especially doing development work? And what are the insights that you found from the last report, the most recent, around institutions and women in the workplace, their place, and what exists out there and how we're doing in comparison to global benchmarks. So why is it, I know it's a lot of questions. Why is it important? And what are the key insights related to women in the workplace and in institutions broadly, because you support Federal Ministry of Health and PHCDA and other clients?
Yeah. No, thanks for that. You know, I always find these questions of like, why is it important to have women in the workplace, or why is it, I also do a lot of work in women's health, right? Why is it important to prioritize women's health? So interesting, because we don't ask these questions about men. You know what I mean? Like, no one ever has asked me, why is it important to have men in the workplace? It's almost taken as a given. And so, you know, as a woman, I'm also a bit like, it's a given. But let me give you the McKinsey kind of response. Look, I think we find that diversity of all sorts is important in the workplace. And even in the way we set up our teams at McKinsey for work is based on diversity, not only in terms of gender, but in terms of background, et cetera, et cetera. So I think there's just a fundamental recognition that diversity of thought tends to lead to better answers. And I'll give you maybe a practical example of that. I was in Kano, for instance, last week on behalf of a client that I'm serving that is predominantly male. And they're designing a program for transitions for out-of-school girls. And the hypothesis had always been that, you know, when the girls move on from education, they should go into like petty trade. So we go with the mothers. And frankly, they kind of look at us a little bit like we're nuts. And they're like, no. Like, we don't want our daughters doing what we're doing. We want our daughters to go to secondary school and university. So, yeah, shea butter and ginger are great. But, like, tell me how this program gets my daughter to University of Kano, right? And it's one of those things where even I was thinking, yeah, like, honestly, like, as a mom, I also want more for my kids than what is in front of me. I think that a woman from a lower socioeconomic background would not want the same. You know what I mean? So I think there's real life of having the diversity of thought at the table. And if we didn't have, in this case, the woman at the table when we were designing, we would have just missed the mark. Now, what are we seeing in Nigeria? Because I think that was the second part of your question. In Nigeria, it's actually very interesting in that we don't have a lot of women that enter the workforce. So our last report showed that if you take entry level, 30% are women, which is in countries like Kenya and India, that number is much larger. But if you follow those women all the way to the end, so like your CEO, president, VP positions, it stays relatively constant, actually. Whereas in other countries, it drops off quite dramatically. Now, there is some variation in that data in the sense that what we see is that women do drop off in the middle in Nigeria, but once they stay, they actually end up getting promoted at a faster rate than men. So that kind of creates that stability. So what that means in Nigeria from a corporate point of view is that we actually need to do a better job at getting more women in. So some countries, they have to do a better job at retaining. We actually have to do a better job at getting more women in. We have to do a slightly better job at preventing some of the drop-off in the middle. But really, if we get more women into the workforce, then we'll start to see some real gains.
Thank you very much, Tola. I think the key there is they should be, because they're human beings, right? And it's important for us to understand or have diverse teams and make entry or make access equitable from the jump, and not only for the top, right? And that leads me to my question to you, Dorothy. So you do a lot of work with communities and survivors, right? So you're coming from that more grassroots. We're talking institutions and leadership and agendas, and now you're going to tell us more about the grassroots. We know that norms shape a lot of the would I say outcomes that the survivors that you work with ultimately get. Question is, how do you think this kind of institutional reforms ultimately make it better or make it worse for survivors of GBV? Where do you see institutional leadership as a barrier showing up with examples? And how do you think we can, what is the change that needs to happen institutionally, in leadership, in women's participation in the workforce, in women's participation in the economy, that can mitigate the kinds of risks that you see with your survivors?
All right, thank you. With my survivors, I am a survivor of sexual and gender-based violence. So I know firsthand what it means to desire support after exposure to trauma. I know what it means to get the desired support, and I also know what it means to sustain desired support. And so for the rest of my life, I would be helping to reform systems to be survivor sensitive. In thinking about the workplace, it's important to remember that so many people, the workplace is our homes, because we have domestic staff at home. We have the gate people, the nannies, and all of that. And so in thinking about the reforms that we're looking forward to, where in the white collar places, it's important to recognize that, for instance, for women who operate businesses from their homes and they serve men, a lot of the men who they serve tend to want to have sex with them because there's the knowledge of the fact that there's a bed nearby. That's a reality that we've seen. And then these days, when we're thinking about technology-facilitated crimes, we're missing from the radar people who just install CCTV systems in their homes, and they put CCTV in the bathrooms where the house help takes her bath. So, I don't know how many of us who are not willing participants on the Big Brother show would want to have ourselves captured every time we need to take a bath, simply because we need to have, earn some money. And then who do these people run to? The access to justice system is designed for the rich, the very rich, and the very, very, very rich. The cost of access to justice is increasingly, it rises by the second. And so it means that even with the institutionalized trauma that you're exposed to, you're expected to endure. You're expected to be the perfect woman. You're expected to be seen and not to be heard. When you earn money, you need to prove that you're loyal to your man by submitting the money to him. Or if you must put your bank account that bears your name, ensure the phone number that receives alerts is his own, And then if you go a bit further, during the COVID lockdown, the pregnant girls we worked with complained bitterly about antenatal care services, in which they said they were made to eulogize the people that got them pregnant. Now, antenatal services are meant to endear people to their partners. And so when they tell you to stand up and before you sit down, you mention the endearing name you call your partner. And people say, darling, honey, this. When it gets to that child who is pregnant because she was raped, what is she supposed to answer in that moment? And so they were thankful that there were face masks. And they said, well, they just say anything. But there were songs that I thought, my husband do good, oh, he don't make my life better, I got to love him forever, oh, he be my baba. That child who has had to drop out of school, or the woman who is not a willing participant in pregnancy, how does that system serve her? And we've also had situations where, because of religious beliefs, where people, if they permit their wives to have IUDs and the rest of them, contraceptives, then it means they are trying to block the blessings of God from coming to the family. And we've had people who are beaten up because they say, okay, now the way they keep your body, now you make your pregnancy to they enter. And so when the pregnancy enters, they beat the woman up. Now, thinking about it, with normative practices, everything wrong that we don't speak up against continues to happen. And so it features in different ways. And for what it's worth, we need to get to the point of ensuring that people are able to speak up about their own realities, because the diversity in realities is wide. We speak very often about female genital mutilation, but not enough conversation is happening about intersex genital mutilation. Some children present as not specifically male or female, and then people, it be like say it look more like boy or it look more like girl. But by the time the person hits puberty, the gender you selected at that point may be different from the one the person is manifesting. Because currently we have a 14-year-old whose mother signed was little, permitting them to have the person as a female, as a male. But now this male has serious stomach issues and is menstruating and has been sealed. So who is going to bear the cost of the medical situations? Again, we cannot keep thinking for people. We need to have non-judgmental systems that are able to receive people's situations, treat them for what they are, and we need to have gender-responsive budgeting in action. It is not negotiable. Failure to do that is irresponsibility and keeps costing lives by the second. If you leave me, I'll go on and on.
All right, thank you so much, Dorothy. Sorry, please, Rai had an emergency, so I have to come up here. There's a barcode that has been shared across. I don't know if we have the people on this side able to get the barcode. Okay, so the barcode is meant to be for questions and answers, and then we're moving to the interactive polls. So, it's time for Q&A, please. If you have any question for the speakers, you can just raise your hand. We're going to take 1 or 2 questions from the audience. Okay. So do we have mic? Okay. So please let us know who you're directing your question to. And then the QR code is also going round so that we can document more questions that we have. Okay.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Progress. I'm a communications and gender equity consultant. My question is to the panel, to the first speaker who's not here. So she spoke about creating spaces for nursing mothers, especially women with children, for example. She mentioned creating crutches and spaces for mothers to nurture their toddlers. So my question is, what's done when it comes to ensuring that men or husbands are participants in that space as well? For example, there is paternity leaves as well as maternity leaves, which ensures that men are able to support their nursing wives to cater for their children. Now, when it comes to the workplace, the way we create spaces for nursing mothers, do we do that for men as well? For men to be able to bring their kids to work so that their wife can have a break? And for example, what in terms of like our outlook when it comes to seeing, how do we react when we see men traveling with their kids? We always like, oh, where's your wife? You know, you always want to interrogate the man as if they do not have the right to be with their kids. So I think there has to be like a mindset shift, because if we keep putting it on the women, we should create spaces for women to have their kids and the rest of it. we would leave out the men, which will in turn trickle down to burnout for women. Because we are talking about gender equity, we're talking about having a balance. So men should be able to have an active participation in raising kids, in just creating safe spaces for women as well. So just going to stop.
All right. Yeah. Okay. So up to you.
No, I think that's an question. So let me maybe share two perspectives, both in terms of how I think we need to change the narrative a little bit for women, and then also where the men come in. And I'm speaking as someone who has 2 young children myself. Look, I think all these flexible working spaces, so whether it's crèche in the workplace and all of that, I think are very important. However, I think that we, as institutions, we need to go the extra mile to really be able to articulate and ensure that that flexibility doesn't come with a penalty, right? Because it's often unspoken, where it's like, okay, yeah, you can, where company, we've given the woman 6 months maternity, we've given them 9 months maternity, but you're away for 6 and 9 months, something is going to suffer. There's an unspoken penalty. Or, we allow flexible work, if you have childcare responsibilities, you don't have to come into work every day. Great, but there's an unspoken penalty. So when that is done, when we create these flexible environments, we have to do the work of coaching, for instance, managers. You have to coach managers. How do you work with people that are on flexible time? Because just because I work 3 days a week and my male counterpart works 3 days a week, like, you have to hold, like, what you have to ensure that I am not going to be penalized for that, in the sense that you are judging me still based on my merit, right? In that 3 days, what I was supposed to do, did I get it done? Also, you're not giving me work that's sort of like, anyone could do. Like, you're giving me real challenging work for my role, for my tenure, for my expertise, and you're holding me accountable. And I think that's often the other side of these flexible arrangements that doesn't get discussed. So I think that's important. The second piece around men, I agree that, just as a woman who I happen to think I have a fantastic husband that shares the load, I do think that, men are involved and should be more involved in parenting. But frankly, I think that's a decision between every man and his wife. Like, it's tough to influence that in the workplace. Now, that said, though, I do know a number of men who, in the corporate world, who do want to make decisions about how they work based on the fact that they have kids, and they don't actually feel comfortable saying that in the workplace. I know someone who said, I don't really want to stay at this job because I don't think that I can sustain these hours as a father. And I remember I said to him, I said, women say that loud and proud all the time. Like, as a man, maybe say that more loud and proud to your male and female colleagues, and maybe we'll start to shift the narrative. So I think there's something around men who are already willing to take on a bit of that role, feeling more comfortable and more vocal, articulating that in spaces, and then I think stuff will start to change. And then last but not least, I'm a firm believer that actually paternity leave should be enforced, and it should be mandatory, because 2 people have had the baby. And so, again, back to this unspoken and spoken penalties, there's some companies that give men a day paternity leave. That makes no sense. So I think that there should be mandatory paternity leave as well, to even make men feel more comfortable about the role that they're playing.
Right, a very quick perspective. While I support paternity leave, we've also had situations where women reported that their paternity leaves were opportunities for the men to take vacations or to go and spend time with the sidees. Good. And so you have these women who are still stuck with their maternity leave running out, especially the ones who needed to go on maternity leave early because the late stage of the pregnancy was very hard on them. And so they're still struggling with their situations, and there's no man. Yeah. The question is, if you give the maternity leaves, do the women know that the husbands have maternity leaves? And then if they know, they can now use it as evidence against him when reporting cases about what is it, abandonment of dependents. If he's supposed to use his maternity leave, paternity leave for paternity purposes, then we can better hold him to account when we know what you have given to him and how he has misused it. Then if he's committing economic fraud, that's an opportunity, utilizing the VAP, to bring him to action, or to hold him accountable for his actions. So there's need for a lot more awareness. So while there's a lot of considerations in the high-end organizations, the entrepreneurial businesses will be struggling for, okay, if I let this person go, who will fill the gap in that time? How do we make things balanced? Luckily, technology has helped us to find middle grounds, but even with that, we need more evidence so that we would hold more people accountable, and that is how bad behavior, will turn into economic benefits for us.
I really agree with both perspectives. Actually, I think color it with like what we've experienced, right? And I know one of the questions was around, well, how about the men? And every time I have a gender discussion, we always have to answer that question, right? What about the boys? What about the men? And I think we have paternity, right? In Cedar, for example, it's a 2-week paternity leave. But I don't know that uptake of that leave is high. I don't know that a lot of men opt in for it. And I say that because one of the anecdotes that I have is the driver in one of our states, it's in Bauchi, and he lives in a neighboring state. So he goes home on, like his wife just gave, but he didn't take paternity leave. He just like went for weekend. And he came back and he said, oh my God, the baby was just crying. This was there. Oh my God, I didn't have any sleep. I didn't have any rest. It was better for me to just stay here. So there's also like, are men willing and ready to take those advantage of those support systems that are there? We have a creche. We have maybe 1 or 2 fathers that bring their daughters there, right? Maybe because the woman has other obligations. But we have fathers that bring men. Majority of the people in the creche, and I can imagine from my team that are here that use the creche, is men and is women, right? The men are their kids there. They're not using these systems that we put in place. Always comes up on Men's Day as well. Women's Day, Men's Day. We're celebrating the men. Are the men
Parenting enough?
No, are we leaning into saying, okay, I want this support as well, or I need these systems as well, or I will opt in if I do a men's mentorship program, right? So I think it's important that intrinsic, that leaning into the support that exists for men. But I think there's then also like, as an organization, what do you do for men to make sure the women don't then burn out, or you don't end up tipping the scales in the opposite direction of where you're coming from? And I would say there are different, the things that I highlighted are special add-ons to our broader workforce support mechanisms that are targeted specifically at women and the gaps that women have. But we do have things that apply to men as well. I think another thing to then bring in is, how are we not being disingenuous? Like, can we just be realistic? So we're talking about parity in leadership, right? In my organization, there's 7 people in senior leadership. 1 is a woman. The other 6 are men, right? The vision is that we need more women to be there. So we need the women, of course, also to opt in. Because leadership is not, you have to opt in, right? And you have to believe you have the support to opt in. So I think on both sides, there's also that mindset shift and that awareness that we need to have to make it happen. And links me back to what you said around VAP Act, and even some of the terminologies you mentioned, I haven't heard before, right? Abandonment of dependent is obviously something that is an issue. Many of us know that that's a thing, and that you can actually file or make a complaint for things like that. So I think we're highlighting the importance of awareness. A big question, though, for me, or something that we need to conclude with, is what are the tools? All the people in this room are either existing within systems or leaders of systems in their workplaces, but are also doing work that benefits populations or systems. What would be the change, or what would be the thing that they should take away that helps us? What are the tools, essentially, or practical strategy, both from an advocate's lens or an implementer's lens or a strategy lens, Tola, in supporting leaders to make the change that is necessary from a decision-making, policy, and strategy perspective, but also from a grassroots engaging with communities and implementing lens? Because the thing is about tools, right? And about how we can make impact and close gaps. So it's really what are the opportunities that we see on the horizon that can help do that.
So maybe I'll answer it less from a grassroots lens and more from like a corporate, like if you're in a big company, SME, whatever. What we found is that there are 3 tools, and the 3 tools are not going to blow your mind when I tell you what they are, but the how they are implemented is actually what matters and what varies. So what we have found consistently is that there's the mentorship, the flexible work arrangements, and there's a third one that's escaping me, but it will come to me. And on mentorship, for instance, you might be thinking, okay, duh, this is obvious, but the truth is, what matters and how these things are done is, number one, there has to be real resourcing towards mentorship. So, okay, you and Jillian are now mentor buddies, good luck, doesn't really work, right? There has to be actual resourcing, whether it's, okay, here's some money that goes towards you guys actually being able to have lunch once a week, or whatever resources looks like in your construct. There has to be opportunity for flexibility. Like sometimes you assign me a mentor, I don't like the mentor. There has to be opportunity to be able to move, and there's a bit of, we can select ourselves. On flexibility, I already started to talk about that. Having flexible work arrangements is all fine and all, but you have to be able to change your systems and processes to actually adapt. Otherwise, once you introduce that, you are, whether consciously or subconsciously, you're actually putting people that take the flexible option at a disadvantage. If your company culture is still one that, you only get the good projects if you're in the office every day. If your company culture is such that, some elements of the promotion just cannot be reached unless you are working 7 days a week. Like if you don't change those things, then really it's just eye service. And the third one I remember now was the kind of like tools for women, whether it's creche and all of that. But as we've been talking, I actually, something that you said struck me a little bit where, if we're realistic, at the end of the day, at the early stages of a child's life, especially if a woman is breastfeeding, she does have a higher part of the load. And every time we talk about systems for women, we only talk about it really in the context of like very, very young kids, where like, the crèche and this and that. But ideally, you are mothering these children and fathering these children so that they're at least 18. And so something you said made me think, we say that, men should bring the kids for the crèche, but at the end of the day, like, they're not breastfeeding, so why does the child really need to be with them? Maybe we haven't actually taken our own medicine and thought, how do we design the systems a little bit for men that are active fathers? Because if you're an active father, I don't think you need a crèche, but you might need like some kind of flexibility that allows you between the ages of, I don't know, your child is 4 to 8. Between those ages, you need a bit of flexibility because maybe that's when your kids are getting into XYZ thing that is important to you. So I think we also need to think a little bit about how do we design systems for parents, right? And not just early mothers, because I think that's where maybe we're missing a bit of a hat trick. Yeah.
Okay, I would say, because I work a lot with some parents who do not have partners, right? And in recognition of the fact that even our homes could be workplaces, the culture of safeguarding, the ideas around safeguarding need to be better appreciated by everyone. Whether it's a small business you're running, you're selling kunu from your house or whatever it is, everybody needs to know more about safeguarding. rsh.org, right? Or .com, RSH. There's a lot of resources there for people to be safeguarding savvy. Now, when you are better safeguarding savvy, you know what policies you need to put in place for your business so that if anybody needs anything, you can tailor your solution needs. And you'll be able to create spaces for people to request for what is needed without fear of negative implications for what they request. Because truthfully, you don't know what everybody needs. If you're planning for parents, you're possibly planning for father and mother. But if you're planning for parents, and because there's some organizations that their policies are applicable, their maternity leaves are applicable only to married staff. So if somebody rapes me and I get pregnant, I'm likely to lose my job. Or if somehow, a consensual relationship in which I am, a pregnancy emerges, I'm likely going to lose my job because you need me to have some moral presentation to society, So we need to create systems that let human beings be human and guide us towards making our businesses or the workspace function effectively for them as human beings in the system. Whether the system is in your home or it's in a bigger institution or it's in your little business, we need to have that feedback system to know what different people need. So when I hear 2 weeks paternity leave, I think of the many women who die in the process of delivery and wonder how the men navigate getting extensions with the paternity leaves, that is given to them. Because so many times, men who ordinarily would not participate in the paternity process, once there's a death of a woman, you look very irresponsible if you're not caring for the child. Everybody is asking about what are you doing about the care of the child, So I think there's need for some flexibility, realizing that different things could come up, and irrespective of what comes up, we need to ensure we don't lose human face. That way, the higher chances of accessing healthcare, higher chances of accessing justice, where justice is the situation, and the economy is better for it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Dar. I think for me, I've taken away 3 things. One is norms show up. It shows up in it's part of the human condition, right? We all want to be part of a collective, and we want to be seen to operate within the ambits of that. And for us to make change, there are a lot of system issues, but also like community or grassroots or individual personal type of issues. Within the systems, we've been talking institutions, but I think the light bulb that you touched for me is the home is like that primary or first system, and also continues to be a place of employment for many people that also leads to those exposure. And how should we think about designing? I think there's participation and talking to the people that are involved, but then there's also being flexible, designing across different, will I say, spectrums of existence, and the core of it should be that we're human. And this is ultimately what the takeaway is for me. Thank you so much, everyone. I hope that this conversation...
Please put your hands together, please. Thank you. Okay, so...